You're listening to Uncoupled and Unfiltered, the show for people smart enough to get out of the wrong relationship and bold enough to do it without losing their damn minds. Hosted by Ksenia Mensch, a divorce strategist and straight-talking badass, this podcast is your no-fluff, no-shame, take-control guide to surviving litigated divorce with clarity, guts, and zero regrets. Let's get into it. Here's Ksenia.
Welcome back to Uncoupled and Unfiltered. I'm your host, Ksenia Mensch, and today I'm sitting down with Amanda Singer, a professional family mediator and founder of West Coast Family Mediation, who helps couples navigate divorce without turning it into a full-blown war. We're breaking down real differences between mediation and litigation, who mediation actually works for and who it doesn't, how to choose the right process for your situation, and some of the biggest misconceptions people have about this process. If you're trying to figure out your next move or just want the truth without the legal stuff, this conversation is for you. But before we dive in, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and share this episode. It tells the algorithm gods that you are into honest conversation, and it also helps me creating content that actually matters. So I really appreciate your support. And now let's get unfiltered and jump into mediation. Amanda, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here today.
All right. So when people, a lot of times, all they know, I just want divorce. And that's all they know. So let's people who are thinking of the D word, let's talk about the mediation and how it's different from litigation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start kind of basic for sometimes people don't know anything about mediation or not much. So, with mediation, you have a mediator who works as a neutral third party. So that mediator isn't going to represent you or your spouse, but is going to work with both people together to resolve the issues related to the divorce. And so, mediators work a little bit differently, just like attorneys can. And so the process can vary a little bit. So I'll talk more about mainly about what our process is, but also note that there can be some differences and you can still work with a mediator in kind of different capacities. But working with the mediator, you have this neutral third party who's going to work with both of the parties to, I say, really facilitate conversation. So especially when you're having trouble communicating, which most people going through divorce are, you have a third party who helps with that communication. And also a really good mediator is helping with problem solving and figuring out creative solutions to, some of the issues that are coming up. And the idea is that you should, if you're doing mediation, that you can resolve all the issues related to divorce. And I kind of break them down into three main areas when we're talking about divorce, especially in California, as I know we both are. The first one being a parenting plan. So if they have kids, anything related to kids. The second area being support. So again, if there's kids, child support, and then even if there's not kids, spousal support. And then the third area being that division of assets and debts. And so in mediation, we work through and resolve all of those issues. A big difference between mediation and litigation, of course, is that you don't have to go to court actually when you're mediating. And so mediators like myself in my business, we take care of the process for clients from start to finish. So if they're mediating, most of them never step foot in court or never have to have a call with the court or do anything that's related to the divorce. We handle those filings. So they don't have to go to court. It's a much more collaborative process because they're working together with the mediator. As I said before, a mediator doesn't represent either spouse individually, but works with both of them. And so you're working all together to resolve the issues. And of course, one of the big things is the cost is so much less. I'm sure you've seen and, people hear about just how astronomical the cost can be if you're going through a divorce with two attorneys. Well, when you're paying one mediator, first off, you've got one professional, although we'll talk about when you might need some other professionals too, that you've got one professional and a cost, and you're not fighting in the same way that you are in court. And so the cost is so much less for the process.
So who is mediation really for? Because you mentioned something extremely important, collaborative. So to me, when I hear the word mediation, both parties have to have the same goal of resolution and moving on. right? So that's when I think mediation is effective. So what, as a mediator, who would you say, if this is how you guys envision, or this is what you want in a settlement, mediation is the right process for you?
So, I mean, the one thing I'd say right off the bat is I think that mediation is the right process for more people than think it is. Because
Hmm.
I think sometimes there is kind of that misconception or thinking of like, well, do we have to agree on everything? Or like, do we have to agree on exactly where we're going? And really, the answer is no. Like, what you do have to agree on is you have to agree to mediate, right? So, as you said, I think you do need two people who are willing to sit down either together in the same room or not in the same room, but at least sit
Hmm.
down and have the conversation. So, I find that it works really well for more people than think it does because people often just either don't know about it or think, well, we have a lot of conflict between us. So how could we ever mediate? Well, it doesn't matter if the conflict is there. It matters more. Well, do you both want to stay out of court, right? Do you both want to
Hmm.
resolve this together ultimately? You don't have to agree on anything else, but you have to be able to say, yes, I want to sit down. And you have to be willing to know that there will be some places of compromise. And that doesn't mean that you have to give in on really important things, but you have to be willing to work with the other person. And in some instances, be able to compromise so to be able to reach a resolution.
Hmm. What about, let's say, I like what you mentioned that mediation can work for more people than people realize, because a lot of times
Mhm.
people like, oh, I just go to court. Because again, that's kind of the only thing they know. The court and attorneys is what helps them settle the legal case, right? They don't understand there
Mhm.
is more collaborative approach. So, but let's say, how do you navigate if you see the agreement is kind of turning one-sided? Do you step in and say something, or do you help the couple, or like if it's one-on-one, help them figure out and make it a little more fair settlement, or do you just let the couple run with whatever they choose?
So it's a kind of a mix of what you've said. I mean, and the reason is that, as a mediator, I am a licensed attorney. Not all mediators are, so that is something to be aware of, but I am a licensed attorney, but I can't give legal advice to both when I'm not
Mm-hmm.
representing either of them. And so when there's a situation where it may seem like it's one-sided or I'm not quite sure if both sides have, all of the information that they need, there's a couple of things that I'll usually do there. One is I can talk about the law itself, right? So I will talk about, well, we're a community property state. And so this might be 50-50. And if you can see that something is being split, 80-20, well, then that you can kind of show what that difference looks like. But the other thing that I like to do is I always recommend that my clients have what we call a consulting attorney. And how I would differentiate that from an attorney who's going to represent you on record in court is that this is somebody that you can use during the process, however much or little that you want. And they're great to be able to review the settlement agreement before you sign it, and just to get advice as we're going through the process. So if something is really one sided, I might require that they
Mm-hmm.
go and talk with a consulting attorney. I don't require it for everyone, but that might be a situation where I say, this really needs to happen. And I'll really, though, recommend it to both. And
Mm-hmm.
then that gives the ability for them to consult with an attorney and see maybe, okay, where is this, not necessarily working out in a way that it should? Is it not? What does it look
Mm-hmm.
like? And other professionals. I'm sure you have talked to or know CDFAs, which are certified
Yep.
divorce financial analysts. So I'm also a CDFA. I don't do straight CDFA work, but I find it's really helpful for a mediator to understand that financial picture. But I will oftentimes refer them also to a CDFA or instead to a CDFA because maybe they really just need to understand the financial information to see whether that situation makes sense. So those kind of situations where I'm not going to take sides, I'm not going to tell them they can't do something, but I am going to make sure that they've
Mm-hmm.
done everything they need to make sure that they feel like that agreement is going to be, and I say equitable. One of the words that I often refer to fair as the F word in mediation because fair is subjective, right? Like
Yes.
what each person thinks is fair. I can't tell you how many people don't think the law is fair, right? And so I can't say like, oh, well, it should be split 50-50. And so that means it's fair because one person's going to be like, but I don't think that's fair. So it's really understanding, though, like what the law is, what your alternatives are. So you
Mm-hmm.
might not get the exact same resolution in mediation, but make sure that you understand what you're giving up in
Mm-hmm.
some instances.
Do you think it overall can be a good practice for people when they're going through mediation? Like you said, the cost is so much lower compared to if you're litigating a case. Just to have the consulting attorney on both sides. So it's almost like there is a sort of peace of mind and there is a sort of trust in the process and potential in a mediator too. Because if you start feeling like, oh, well, even though here's the funny human psychology, right? Even though we as a couple, somebody who went through divorce, understand you're a neutral party, you're not representing us, but if we feel you're not saying anything when you see things are not being fair, the trust
Mm-hmm.
in you can be impacted, right, by that
Mm-hmm.
specific person. Have you seen it in your
Mm-hmm.
practice?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think that that's where I really do try to guide them towards getting the answer from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I also, so some mediators will only meet separately with people, some mediators only meet jointly. I like to do a little bit of both. So we usually start the process off with individual meetings with each person. And I use that as an opportunity to understand goals and interests. And it's also a great time, especially if somebody feels like maybe they don't know what's going on or don't feel like things are going to be
Mm-hmm.
treated fairly. It's a great opportunity to help them understand why they should have a consulting attorney and why they should do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes they're hesitant to do it around their spouse because they wonder, well, are they going to think that I don't trust them or I don't want to mediate? And it's like, no, we talk about this in relation to the whole process. And I would say, like, I always recommend it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that if people came to me and said, like, what should we definitely do? Then I would say definitely have a consulting attorney just available to ask questions so you feel
Mm-hmm.
like you have that person and to review the agreement because this is a big deal, something you're signing that will have impact going, forever. And so make sure that you have that person. Now, I sometimes have people where either they're concerned about the cost of working with attorneys and a mediator, or they're just like, we don't want to work with attorneys. I don't require it, but I am very
Mm-hmm.
like firm about it. And the other thing I say to people is be aware of who your consulting attorney is. Make sure that that is somebody who is mediation friendly, right? They're not going to try to pull you out and try to litigate the issues. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
advise you and they're going to help you, but they're also going to acknowledge that sometimes in mediation, you're going to give certain things up and
Yes.
compromise because it's the alternative in court. Although maybe you could get something different, how much are you going to pay for it? What's the
Mm-hmm.
stress? And the time it takes to get it. So the attorneys are different, those who are really good at advising in mediation versus those who
Mm-hmm.
might just try to pull them into litigation.
Yes, I agree with you. When it comes to attorneys, you just have to find somebody who looks out for your interests, who has your back, the
Mm-hmm.
consulting attorney, without trying to, again, pull you out of this collaborative settlement or
Mm-hmm.
approach.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even when you go through court, there are still you never get everything that you want. Number one, because again, it's
Mm-hmm.
the fair is there are like guardrails of the law and you are going within that, but it's still there is a little bit of movement. There are two people that you're
Yeah.
trying to make a settlement with, so there is always going to be some give and take. What do you see people fight the most about? Like, it sounds like a silly question, but where do you see people get stuck the most when it comes to mediation?
Yeah. I think that spousal support is one of the areas
Oh
that
my
people get the
gosh,
most
yes.
stuck. Yeah. And I will say it because I don't care who you are, I don't care what gender you are or this, nobody ever really wants to pay spousal support, right? Even when they know that they're going to, there is no like, oh, I wish I could pay my spouse money, right? Like there's just that feeling isn't there. And so it's one of those areas where it's a difficult conversation. And I think too, there's always kind of this revisionist history, right? Of like, well, you chose not to work. Why should I
Yeah.
have to pay support? And I'm like, well, think back. Is that really how that conversation went 10 years ago? Right. And
Yeah.
so I think that spousal support is, but it's always going to be, even in court, I think it's one of those areas that's really like most litigated. Also, because there isn't a hard fast, like, this is how much it has to be. When you talk about like guardrails of the law, I think that's very wide when it comes to spousal
Mm-hmm.
support. And there's a lot of, areas in which it could be very different if you're in court, unlike
Mm-hmm.
child support, where we have this like formula that's very straightforward. So I think that that's one of the areas that's the most difficult. And to go along with that, one household to two households is always more expensive. And
Mm-hmm.
for, those people like you and I who live in Southern California, but even all of California, it's an expensive place to live. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're going into the situation where you're being told you need to pay your spouse support because they may not have income, and you yourself are also trying to figure out how are you going to support yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that those conversations are always difficult because it's about the money. It's about understanding that you're not going to, for very few people are you both going to be able to stay at the same standard of living as you were before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hardest. So I'd say that, we certainly have ways of having those conversations and resolving the issues, and somewhat, I think, in a way that people feel more comfortable than when they just get told they have to pay a certain amount. But that's definitely the area that I think is the stickiest.
I agree. And I think it's because you mentioned it, there is no formula that goes into that at all. So they kind of look at both of your standard of living, right? They estimate approximately, and what I've seen through court, it's the court is trying to be fair. Again, the
Mm-hmm.
vague word, right? But they're looking that you're both wait the expenses are about like the payments about 50-50 of what combined income
Mm-hmm.
was before you filed. So I think that the payor gets like on the average 52 to 55, and no, sorry, somebody who pays gets like 52 to 55%, and somebody who receives is getting like 45ish percent. That's what I've seen. But again, it's such a hot topic because I've heard from many people, if I cannot be with this person, why am I ordered to pay? But
Yeah.
that person, for whatever reason, they decided, or no, not that person, you as a family decided that
Mm-hmm.
that was the right thing to do. So it is funny how all those, yeah, rewriting history and trying to come up with why it shouldn't happen when they know it will happen. So it's
Mm-hmm.
uh
Yeah.
it's it's a funny fight, but I feel like it never stops because later on you can still go and renegotiate it, right? What are the
Mm-hmm.
instances when they can go and renegotiate the alimony?
So some of it depends on like what is the original agreement that was made, right? So
Mm-hmm.
most of the time in court, you're not going to have a non-modifiable order just because that's how it is. Sometimes in mediation, though, I have clients who choose to like set a specific amount and make it non-modifiable, which there's reasons why both people might want that. But
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, assuming your order is modifiable, then it has to do with like change in circumstances. But it can't just be that, all of a sudden the person paying support is making way more than they made during the marriage, because we are still talking about standard of living. So there
Yes.
are some factors that are going to come into play. But yeah, what I would usually say is that there are changes that occur. So one of those could be if they were paying child support, if the children age out and there's no more child support, that can impact how much spousal support is. It could be if one person loses their job, or if
Mm-hmm.
there's an increase or a decrease in the amount of pay. So there's lots of different scenarios in which it can change over time. And one of the things that I would say with clients is that when they do mediation to start and they do their agreement, their divorce through mediation, we find that when those instances come up, they actually come back to mediation instead of just going straight to court. So
Mm-hmm.
not only are they saving like the time and the money and the stress through the divorce, but they're also in the long run finding that they're saving that going forward, because anytime there's a change, you may have heard or know those people where anytime something happens, they're right back in court. Well, instead of doing that, they're coming back to mediation, and
Mm-hmm.
we're working together to renegotiate. I have a couple cases right now where I did the divorce and now they're coming back to rework the support numbers.
Got it. Uh, who would you say mediation is not good for?
So I think like the main area that I like the biggest one people I would say is, anybody who's going to walk in here and be like, it's my way or the highway, whether it's one person or both people, doesn't matter how good like I am as a mediator or any mediator you go to. If somebody or both people aren't willing to compromise, there just isn't anywhere to go. Right. And so we've all like
Mm-hmm.
heard of those people where it's just like, nope, this is what I want. I think this is what's fair, and I'm not going to agree to anything different. Well, in that case, it's like, okay, you got to go to court then and just realize that some of the things that you're thinking you're going to get, you don't get. And there's that. The other area I would say is not that it can't be done, but when there is domestic violence, especially if it is active, so kind of a difference between if there's been domestic violence in the past or whether it is still ongoing, that's one of those areas where you have to be much more careful and aware about what you're doing in mediation. It doesn't mean they couldn't mediate, but it's one of those where I would say they should definitely have attorneys. The meetings may need to take place in separate, rather
Mm-hmm.
virtual rooms or in person rooms. It's just one of those areas where you've got to be careful and aware, mainly because there is usually a power imbalance. And
Yes.
if that's not addressed, in mediation, if there's not somebody advocating for the person with the less at
Mm-hmm.
least perceived power, you don't want them agreeing to things that are, like you said, are totally different than what they really
Mm-hmm.
should do or what the law would say.
hmm I have seen in and I've heard from many attorneys when it comes to like domestic violence, and you mentioned the power imbalance. There is this dynamic that both people are so used behind closed doors. There is a
Mm-hmm.
perpetrator, and another person just caves in to make it stop. And a lot of
Yeah.
times it can end up in settle, even when they're litigating. I've seen it too, and I've heard it. People just want to settle to make it stop without realizing that 3 to 5 years down
Yeah.
the road, you want to go back and renegotiate because you understand that you made a mistake. And then the
Mm-hmm.
cost is ballooning because I mean just filing requests for order, it it's
Mm-hmm.
up pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's where it's important. It's not that they can't, but there are just some safeguards to make sure that are in place. Any time we have a new case, all mediators should do this, is we do a DV screening so that we are, and now it's going to be what they tell us. So that is going to be, but we are screening to at least be aware if there are things that we should be concerned about. And then, of course, sometimes I've had cases where there have been passed either TROs or restraining orders, and then it's definitely a different process in terms of, okay, like, is there an exception for mediation? Because there can be an exception
hmm
to the restraining order for mediation, and other times I've had it where I've had to communicate completely individually back and
hmm
forth with the parties.
What about, let me say, okay, since we're talking about the challenging mediation cases, but still doable,
Mhm.
if one person who maybe they're not fully willing to compromise, but let's say they're stalling the process, because a lot of times litigation helps when the party is being difficult and stalls the process. Oh, I'm gonna do it when I'm ready to do this. I'm not gonna sign this until X, Y, and Z. How do you work with those clients, or do you just tell them, okay, it's time for you to go to courtroom?
So there's definitely a lot of things that we'll try first to like move forward. I mean, the biggest thing that I will talk about with people is like, you're going to have to do the exact same thing in court. So do you want to do it the easy way, or do you want to do it the really difficult and expensive way?
Okay.
Right. And so sometimes it's just getting them to realize, um, they may not want to do it, or they may be like dragging their feet, but like, okay, can we work together to figure out how to get this done? The other thing is sometimes it's just realizing that people will move at different speeds, and
Mm,
there's the idea that like when people come in to divorce in general, but let's say specifically in a mediation, if one person especially if one person is the one driving the process, if you think about it as like a continuum, this person might be over here, right? They are
hmm
ready to go. They are like, I am ready to get out of here. I want to be living separate. I want to be divorced, and I'm done, right? And this person, regardless of whether you think they should have been aware or like known what was going
Hmm.
on, they may be all the way over here, right? Because they may just, their spouse may have just told them they wanted a divorce 2 weeks ago. And to them, it is a complete surprise and they have no clue what's going on. And this person over here has been thinking about it maybe for years, right? And so the idea is not that we need to get this person all the way here to the same spot, but you have to get them moving some because you can only move as quickly as the slowest person. And that
Yes.
even happens in court because, yes, you can have court dates and you can do certain things, but if they're not going to do stuff, it's going to take way longer. And so I find a lot of times it's kind of us having a conversation with that person. What's holding them up? Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's they're just feeling stuck. Do they need a divorce coach? Do they need a CDFA? Like, do they need somebody to help them through the process? It's not always going to work. And yes, sometimes they end up having to just say, okay, we're going to go to court and deal with it there. But I find that there a lot can happen when you kind of have that conversation and can kind of help that person see what the alternative is going to look like.
How long on average does mediation take? So I know in California, again, you file and it's then 6 months and 1 day pull off period. So in case you change your mind,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, but in court, it usually, I mean, if you finish within 2 years, that, oh my gosh, that was fast, right?
Yeah.
What about mediation? What's the average duration of the process?
Yeah, I would say that the average is probably about 6 months. I mean, there are some people who want to get done super quick and then they're done with mediation and we're just waiting for the cooling off
Hmm.
period to just be done. And then I have other cases that do go for like a year or two, but I'd say on average, kind of 6 to 9 months, depending on, if they move at a decent pace, if they get their financial documents when we ask them,
Hmm.
if we have our meetings and everything, we can get done in 6 to 9 months. So as you mentioned, I mean, that's going to be way quicker than you're going to get anything resolved in court.
Do you know the rationale behind this cooling off period? Is it like for the other person to catch up with the one who is driving the process? Is it just be sure what you are doing is like right for you? Or I could never understand it, to be honest.
It's a good question because in some instances, it's kind of like, okay, well, there are things that have to happen, right? So, like when you file the petition, and actually starting in the January of this year, California now has a joint petition. Don't know how much you know about that or your listeners do, but happy to talk a little bit more on that because
Yes.
that's interesting. But either way, when you start the process, you file a petition and then you have to do your disclosures. You have to reach agreements, right? You have to draft your settlement agreement and you have to do all the final documents. So, you're not going to ever get it done in like, a couple of weeks, right? Like there's things that
Hmm.
need to happen. So I think maybe that's kind of what that 6 month cooling off period was, is like, this is the time that you're going to work through the process. But sometimes I do have people, they come in and they know all of their agreements
Hmm.
and we get everything done in like a month or two. And then they just have to kind of wait out that time.
Yes.
So that's a good question. I'll actually have to do some research because I'm curious about it. But the joint petition, it sounds like you don't
Yes.
know much
No, I
about
have
that.
not because I mean my
Yeah,
divorce is over and it sounds like it's brand new. Yes,
yeah,
let's
it
talk
is.
about what it is and how it affects the couple now going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, so it started January 1st, so it is completely brand new. And what it is there is a joint petition process. So before this joint petition, there was what's called a summary dissolution, where if you were married for like less than 5 years and you have no kids and like very little assets, you can do it jointly. It still takes the 6 months, but it's like cheaper and quicker and all of that.
Hmm.
But this is the same as like a regular petition would be. But instead of one person being the petitioner, filing and then having to serve their spouse, and then that person's the respondent, and then they have to file a response, both of them together sign and file a joint petition. The document is actually also made to be a lot more like pro per or self-represented friendly. And so it kind of is easier for people to fill out if they're doing things on their own. But one person becomes petitioner one and one person becomes petitioner two. And when you file the joint petition together, you both sign it, you file that, you both have to file the UCCJEA if you have kids. And then each county may have their own local forms, so you still have to do those. But you file it, you pay both of your filing fees at once. And then the 6 months starts from the date it's filed, not from the
Hmm.
date it's served. And so it starts that process, and then you're doing it together. You get your agreements, and then you file at the end. And so it takes out the service. I find that, especially for clients in mediation where we're already working together, it's much nicer to be able to say to them, you don't have to get served. You're both going to be the ones filing.
Hmm.
Like, we do it as the process together. And then the only thing to note is that the other forms still say petitioner and respondent. So petitioner one becomes petitioner, and petitioner two is technically respondent for any other
Hmm.
forms they fill out. And then if for some reason it dropped out of being friendly and working together, you just default to one person's petitioner and one person's the respondent in the same way I said before.
Do they have to refile it to now be qualified as petitioner and respondent or no?
That's a good question. No, but there's a form to file that's called, I can't remember exactly what it is, if it's like revoking the joint petition or if it's like
Oh, got it.
basically moving them from this track over to the regular
Hmm.
track. But everything you've done up until then still holds.
But I just want to make sure for listeners, if joint petition doesn't mean you have to do it jointly, you still can file and serve if the other party is not willing or ready for whatever reason. They say, okay, I
Yes.
don't want divorce, but one party can still file and go the old-fashioned route, right?
Yes, absolutely. They're both still available. So you can do either of them. This is just
Mhm.
another option. And I think that what is good about it is sometimes I think that people are interested in mediation or are interested in doing things together, and they just don't really know how to do it because they go and they look at this paperwork and they're like, but wait a second, I have to serve you and we can't do this
Yeah,
together. Right. So I think it
it's
just gives people
scary.
the opportunity. It's scary, absolutely. And it gives them the opportunity to work together
Hmm.
as opposed to feeling like, oh, I have to go hire an attorney who files and serves my spouse. And now my spouse is concerned and they go and hire an attorney and things just go from there.
It creates mistrust very quickly because it feels like,
Yeah.
again, the one person is attacking the other one. Another one feels like they're on defensive because, again, regardless of what you think of divorce, yes, it's very common these days. It's still a legal process. And so you're being
Mm-hmm.
served, you're being petitioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a lot. And one thing that I know I didn't realize, and for listeners who are going through that or thinking to go through that, the 6 month and one day kicks off when the other party is served. Like when it
Yeah.
comes to the regular, because I remember I filed and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, so I'm calculating how, like, when I'm allowed to finalize. And then, oh no, it happens only after the serve, and that takes about a month. And so it just delays, but for people, so they are not surprised or blindsided by that. That's how it works in California, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is correct. Yeah. So that the joint petition, now it's filing because you're both signing.
Yes.
So you don't have to serve. Yeah.
Can we really quickly touch upon? I think it's so important when it comes to financial asset division, separation date versus filing date. Why is separate?
Mhm.
What is separation date, and why it is so important? What it is important to know
Mhm.
when you separate it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So a data separation, sometimes it could be the same date you file, but usually it's before. And oftentimes, or not oftentimes, I've had times where it's been like years in the past. That's not as
Oh,
common, but it can be. It can be, yeah, it comes up. But basically, your data separation, and there's a, legal, there's a family code section around this, but it's basically when was the unequivocal end, right? When did you guys, when was it definite? Okay, we're getting divorced. And if it was not both people that agree on it, then it becomes, okay, well, when did that one person at least decide and communicate and start taking steps towards living separately?
hmm.
So there have certainly been times where I have had to mediate issues around data separation because they have a difference of opinion on what that would be.
Hmm.
And so, if you are sure that you are, this is your data separation, it's got to be something that's communicated. It's got to be something
Hmm.
that like you're taking steps towards, because otherwise you get into mediation or you get into court and now you have these two different data separations. And before you can even figure out how you're going to separate your assets and debts, you have to know, well, what date are we valuing those at?
Yes.
Because The data separation is when things are no longer community property.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what's important. It's also important for the length of marriage. So if you're looking at how long your marriage is, especially if you are around a long-term marriage, so if you're coming up on 10 years or you're just above it, it can matter as to when your data separation is because it affects the length of time you're married.
Hmm. I can see when it can get pretty contested. If it's around, like, if it's a pretty clear cut,
Mm-hmm.
you've been married 5 to 7 years, that's one thing. If you've been married 15, 16 years, it's very difficult to say, oh, like I told that person 6 years ago I wanted separation or
Yeah.
something like that, right? But if it's around that mark, I can see how it is contested because the laws are very different, what the way they apply to the asset split, right? And also the
Mm-hmm.
spousal support, correct?
Mm-hmm. It's different for spousal support. It's not different for asset split in the sense that like whether
Okay.
you're married for 10 years or you're married for 8 years, it's still 50-50 based on data marriage to data
Mm-hmm.
separation. But for excuse me, for spousal support, for sure, it makes a difference. And I think the thing that happens is that people are like, well, I was giving them time, I was waiting. And it's like, okay, but if you don't communicate what you're doing, then you end up
Mm-hmm.
arguing over is that the date. And oftentimes the concern is that there's something financially that happened, right? So I have clients where there's a lot of RSUs that just happen to vest, after the data separation or
Mm-hmm.
things that they received or purchased. So it's one of those where I think, yeah, it is important. I'd say the majority of cases people are agree on it or at least are
Mm-hmm.
within a close area. But
Yes.
yeah, every so often I have those ones where they're never going to agree too, is the thing. And so it more becomes how do we negotiate when we're valuing things, even if emotionally you don't think that you agree on what the date was.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the biggest misconception about around mediation?
I think I think there's two that come to mind for me. One is what we already talked about a little bit that like, more people can mediate than I
Mm-hmm.
think people think they can, right? So I think sometimes people think, oh, mediation's only good if you like, if you guys like each other and you get along and you agree on everything. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's not what it is. I think the other misconception around mediation more has to do with like mediators themselves, because I think that there are a lot of people out there who do some mediation. There's a lot of attorneys who might also mediate, but I think it's understanding that like mediation is a very different process from litigation and making sure that you're working with a mediator that really understands and knows that. And yes, it can be helpful to have a mediator like myself that are a licensed attorney, but it's more important to make sure that they are somebody who has really extensive mediation training and they understand the difference between the two processes, because sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
find that people will go to an attorney who's kind of does some mediation on the side and it gets really kind of convoluted around, well, what role are they taking? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they think, oh, they're representing both of us, and it's like, well, no, they can't represent both of you. So are they representing one of you? So it's more about making sure that you understand, there isn't uh, attorneys, it's very clear. You're either licensed by the state bar or you are not. Mediators, unfortunately, we don't have the same like licensing and
Mm-hmm.
credentialing. And so I think it's just important of understanding who that mediator is and what it is that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. How can people choose the right mediator for their situation? Because I know it can be overwhelming. I mean, you're starting
Mm-hmm.
a divorce process. You true like a deer in the headlights. And a lot of people, they
Yeah.
don't educate themselves at all. They think it's someone else's responsibility. The attorney will figure out, mediator will figure it out. And then there are a lot
Mm-hmm.
of options. And again, if you do not know who is good, who's bad, and again, when we start the process, we don't know that world. So how do you choose
Yeah.
the right mediator or the quality mediator?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's the first step of like just finding mediators, right? Like there's that
Yes.
first step. And one of the things that I would say there is that, if you have professionals in your life that you trust, maybe you have a CPA that you trust, or you have another attorney that asking them can be a great first place to start, because attorneys, oftentimes have like a
Yes.
network that they're able
Yes.
to, right, provide those referrals. So I think that's a great place to start if you have that. If you don't, Google these days, AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, like
Yep.
asking for referrals. Like you're going to at least get some to start with, right? So if you can find, maybe you start with 3 to 5, right? And then from
Mm-hmm.
there, call most of the mediators, not all, but I know we do, and a lot of people will do like an initial phone call, right? A free consult, something that's going to allow you to talk for like 15 minutes or 30 minutes and get more information. And then that's the time where you can then kind of narrow down who's the right mediator. And that's going to come
Mm-hmm.
down to what are their qualifications, right? Asking them questions, understanding how they bill, understanding what their process looks like. Do they have a process, right? You'll know pretty
Mm-hmm.
quickly if they actually do mediation often as to whether they can tell you what the process looks like. If it's kind of just oh, well, we have some meetings and then this, well, then you may want to dig in more. And then ultimately, it's like, who do you feel comfortable with? Who do you both feel that you trust and you can feel comfortable with? Because, it doesn't matter ultimately, like if they have the best credentials or
Mm-hmm.
you feel that they have the best process, if both spouses don't feel comfortable, then it's not going to be the right fit. So that's what I would say. And if you find one mediator and you don't have other ones, ask them if they have any referrals. I mean, people ask me that, and I know that might sound weird, right? Because I'm giving them people as competitors, but in my mind, like, I would rather them mediate with someone, even if it's not me. And I would rather give them people that I know are good in the
Mm-hmm.
field and have them talk to them, even if they choose one of them over me. So
Mm-hmm.
asking those questions, and just being prepared, and being able to get information the best you can, especially if you're able to meet with people where there's no cost involved to
Mm-hmm.
start.
Have you ever fired clients?
I have, yes. Not common. There were one set of one clients who like had literally just started, and I just realized it wasn't gonna work. I think that they were doing it for the wrong reasons. I think in that situation, I think it was husband I felt like really wasn't actually gonna participate. And I just said, you know what? I'm gonna refund you your money, and I think you need to find a different mediator to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, very rarely. I had one case where one of the parties refused to do their financial disclosures, and it is very
Mm.
clear in our agreement that if you refuse to do those, I can't work with you because I don't have that information. And so, that was a situation where I had to say that, as well. So it's rare. I've been mediating now for, gosh, over 13 years. And so there's like, a couple of times it's come up, but it's definitely rare.
So the final couple questions. What's one thing the couple must do before starting mediation?
I mean, the biggest thing before they start mediation is just making sure they're both committed to the process, right?
Mm,
So making sure that like this is the right process for them, because there are other, we talked mainly about mediation today, and of course
hmm.
we've reflected a little bit on differences with litigation, but there are many different ways to do your divorce.
Yes.
There isn't just mediation or litigation, and so making sure that you're both committed to the process, and then making sure, like we talked about, that you've researched and interviewed some mediators so that you make sure that you're with the one that's the right fit for you.
Hmm. What about what the couple must never do before mediation? Hide
Oh gosh,
assets?
must never do. Yeah, I mean, don't do that for divorce in general. I would say though a different answer, and this isn't necessarily a never, but I'm gonna say like a strong thing is if you and your spouse are fighting a lot about certain topics, don't
Mm,
talk about them before coming into mediation. Like give that to the mediator. And I say that because sometimes what happens is people, I think, try to get things done on their own, right? They're like, well, we'll just talk about this and we'll work it out ourselves. But what happens is a lot of times they get in fights over it. It becomes very emotional. One person gets frustrated or angry or upset or whatever it is, and it makes it worse. So I will say to clients when we start mediation, listen, you can talk about things outside of the mediation room if it works, but if it's not, don't have those conversations. Just
hmm.
save it. Just say, this is why we're hiring a mediator, and save those conversations. So if you see that happening, don't do it. Just know that it's going to make things worse and probably cost you more money and more stress when you do
Hmm.
get to the time, as opposed to just saying, hey, let's not have that conversation and let's deal with that in mediation.
Hmm. Do you find that divorce coaches can be helpful when working with mediation or not? Because divorce coaches, I know this is what I do. There are more and more people that are coming into this
Mhm.
field trying to help others navigate and also save some money too financial. I think there is a huge cost benefit when you're working with a divorce coach compared to constantly running to an attorney. Um, do
Yeah.
you in your practice, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think divorce coaches are a great addition to the divorce, ecosystem in general. And I think that honestly, more people could benefit from them than use them. Exactly to your point, it's going to be way more cost efficient than like a lot of the things that you're going to have conversations with your attorney about. And your divorce coach can help you figure out, no, this is now a conversation to take to your attorney. This is a conversation to
Mm-hmm.
take to your mediator and really like help break that down. So I will tell you that I often refer my clients to divorce coaches.
Mm-hmm.
When they ask, and even when they don't ask, sometimes I might recommend it
Mm-hmm.
if I see how things are going. And I will tell you, I can tell when they do have someone they're working with because they're way more organized, and not just from the perspective of like they've got their papers together, but
Mm-hmm.
they just feel more prepared coming into the meeting. They
Mm-hmm.
may have they may better control their emotions when something upsets them because they've had those conversations and they have somebody helping them through the
Mm-hmm.
process. So I think it's great. I think that it's one of those where again, not everyone's going to use other professionals at
Mm-hmm.
all, but it's an area where it can be really helpful, even if it's just, meet with someone a couple times to help you
Yes.
figure out in the mindset, figure out your options, right? I'm sure you
Mm-hmm.
see people before they've even done anything and filed and
Yes.
and can be a great resource to say, well, let's just talk through what your options are and how
Mm-hmm.
you're going to figure out what you want to do.
Yes, I just remember when I was going through my process, I did not actually know about divorce coaches. And I was reaching out. I was my attorney and I had therapists, and I was having so many opinions, and I wasted so much money asking questions that
Mm-hmm.
should not have been asked. Or if I had a coach, the coach would have told me, nope, you're good. That one is not for an
Mm-hmm.
attorney. This one you need to figure out on your own. Let's strategize here. So it's interesting now that the hindsight is 2020. But I just remember my attorney was like everything. That's my
Yeah.
beacon of hope. Just like I'm sure you as a mediator, when couple is really looking forward to be done, they're looking at you
Yeah.
truly like a beacon of hope. You the lighthouse.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, how can the listeners get in touch with you? Because I do truly believe, and I always advise, even though I focus on high conflict and litigated divorce, if you can mediate, please do so. You save
Mm-hmm.
emotional health, mental health, I mean, financial health, all of the health that are
Yeah.
out there, you will save if you mediate.
Yeah, absolutely. Westcoastfamilymediation.com is a great place to go online. We have a ton of resources, a lot of articles, videos.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, even if you're litigating and you just want some more information, it can be a great place to go and find information. But you can find us online there. And then from there, you can also find like our social accounts, our phone number, email, all of that. So, that's really a great place to start. And like you said, certainly there are cases where they're not going to end up in mediation, but there are situations where even high conflict cases, maybe you mediate one issue, or maybe you
Mm-hmm.
mediate after you've been litigating for a while. So there are always different options, and you're never really stuck with what you started with.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you mentioned also is such a great added value benefit to the people who are considering it, that they can talk to you for 15-30 minutes to just kind of get a
Mhm.
consult and understand the process a little bit, what it's like to work with you. And I will put all that information in the notes of the show so they know how to get in touch with you when they decide D word is the right path for them. I mean.
Mm. Sounds good. Well, thank you.
Amanda, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise and making us understand how mediation is a much better route when you can help yourself. So, and thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
All right, guys, and thank you for listening to Uncoupled and Unfiltered. Until next time.
That's it for this episode of Uncoupled and Unfiltered. If you're loving the raw truth and practical takeaways, do the badass thing and rate and review the show wherever you listen. It helps more good people find their way out of the chaos. And check the show notes. Yeah, we actually put some useful stuff in there. Resources, links, tools, go grab what you need. Until next time, don't settle, don't shrink, and don't look back.